there on top of Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph. It's the first word on the daf, so quite convenient. And it's a new Mishnah, which is quite straightforward in some ways and very interesting. So remember that our parak is discussing the question of when a father and a husband can be meifir nidarim, right? So the Torah makes it sound like there are several situations in which a husband and a father can be meifir, or essentially negate the nidarim of a wife or daughter. And we talked last Shabbos, basically, last Motzaei Shabbos, about an in-between situation where both the father and the husband do it, and that's a na'ara hamu'orasa. So she's a woman who's in the age before she's an adult, which we call 12 and a half. And she's also only engaged, not consummated her marriage, meaning that she's married, but she's living with her father still in her father's house. And there it requires both of them. So that's the discussion. We had it all last week. We talked about many other cases, et cetera, et cetera. Says the Mishnah today a new question, which
what's the daf
is coming, which is Shomeret Yavam, a person who is waiting to do Yibam, right? So a person who's waiting to do Yibam, meaning a woman who basically got married. Let's assume she just did Erison. She got married to Ruvain. Ruvain dies before Nisuin. Now, let's assume for our mission that she's still a Na'ara, right? So she's 12. She got engaged, which is again real marriage, Erison. And then her husband died, so she falls to Yibam to his many brothers, right? Let's assume he has many brothers. So says the Mishnah, Bein li Yavam echad, whether he has one brother, so that she falls to one Yavam, or Bein l'shnei Yavmin, or of course many Yavamot, then in that case, so what happens, right? And she has a neder. So who can be mefer her neder? Oh, now we're joining this. Okay, so who can be mefer her neder? Says the Mishnah, Rebbe Eliezer Omer Yafer. The Shomeret Yavam can be mefer her neder, which is a radical thing to say, and the Gemara is going to have to explain exactly what that means, right? Because presumably, this person's not quite married to her, right? He's connected to her in some way, but he's not married. And so how in the world could he be mefer her neder if he's not married to her, basically? So anyways, Rebbe Eliezer says he is. Rabbi Yoshua says, well, le'echad, if there's one Shomeret Yavam, then he can do mefer her nedarim. Aval lo l'shnayim, but not if there are two. So that if Ruvain dies and there's one surviving brother, then she is zakuk, she's connected to that brother, in which case he's essentially married to her. But if there's two, then she's not zakuk to any one of them. So therefore, or she's not only zakuk to one of them, and therefore that person cannot be mefer. Again, the Gemara is going to try to understand the contours of this whole discussion. Rabbi Akiva says, no, lo le'echad v'lo l'shnayim. Doesn't matter whether there's one yavam or two yavamot, yav, I don't know what the plural is, two yavamim, I guess, yavmim, or five or whatever. They cannot do hafara for her nidarim because they're not married to her. Says the Mishnah, Amar Rebbe Eliezer. Said Rebbe Eliezer, I don't understand you, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshua. Look, take an isha, it's a kal v'chomer. Mam isha shekanahu la'atzmo, right? A woman who, when a man marries a woman, he basically did it all by himself, meaning there's nothing extra there. She was unattached, he's unattached, they get married. It's totally his power. Harehu meifir nidara, right? If a person gives kiddushin to a woman and they're now an erison, and she's a nara, he can be mefer her nidarim with her father. But so certainly a woman who comes through Yibam, Isha shehikne lo min hashamayim, where the Torah or God basically made the marriage, right? Because again, she's married to Ruvain. Ruvain dies, so now she's betrothed essentially, or committed to Shimon, right? So how could that not be just as powerful as a man-made kind of marriage? So certainly, it's kal v'chomer. He should be able to be made for a nidarim. Amrula Rabbi Akiva, slow down, right? That's not really comparable at all. You're wrong. It's one thing if a person goes and marries a woman on his own, nobody else is married to that woman. He's married there, although he hasn't consummated the marriage, it's only erison. It's no one else can be married to her at that time. So that, therefore, their connection is deep enough that he can be made for her nidarim. right? But Tomar Isha Shekno Min Hashamayim. What about a woman who, you're right, the Ruvain dies, right? His widow is now zakuk to Yibam to all the brothers. But she's zakuk not just to one brother, she's zakuk if there are 5 brothers, there's a connection to all of them. So a woman to Isha Shekno Min Hashamayim, Yeshla Achirim Barashut. There's other brothers potentially who also have a connection to her. So you can't say that this brother Shimon has a strong enough connection to her because Hashem made him be married to her, and therefore he can be made for her Nedarim. Clearly, there's something that's not complete about their connection because there's many other people who have a connection to her.
Well, what if there's only one brother?
So said Rabbi. So there continues the Mishnah. Amar le Rabbi Yoshua. So Rabbi Yoshua said, Akiva divarecha b'shnei yavmin. Your words are very convincing if there are 2 brothers. But mata meshiva yavam echad. What are you going to say if there's only one brother? Why isn't that connection deep enough? Amar lo. So Rabbi Akiva said back to him, Ein he didn't answer. They wouldn't have a bright that he's going to give an answer. But he said back to him, Ein hayavama gemura liyavam. A yavama is not gemura in the sense meaning complete. Their connection is not deep. Kishem sharusa gemura liisha. Like a man who gets married in arusa to a woman, that's a real connection. This is not as deep a connection. No, it's not. It didn't explain why.
It's not too. That's why, maybe.
Well, you could do a get if you're a married person. So the fact that you can get out of it,
that's different, I think.
Okay, well that's what Akiva says. So
maybe chalitza is even preferable, or there's whatever. It's different.
Okay, well the Gemara is going to discuss it. So.
I feel like this is crazy because I was learning parts of Yerushalmi Yavama this afternoon, and they're discussing similar things.
I don't know that much about Yerushalmi, unfortunately, but this Gemara that we're about to have is almost word for word in the Bavli in Yevamot, which we learned together.
Yeah, the Yerushalmi doesn't agree with the Bavli on a lot of things. But,
right.
Well,
anyway, so this Gemara is elsewhere. It's not exactly the same, of course, but it's very, very similar Gemara in Yevamot Chavtet. Same Mishnah, same idea. Says the Gemara. Now let's try to understand this 3-way machloket. Rabbi Akiva, who says that there's no connection, not enough of a connection between any Yavama to a Yavam so that he can be made for her Nedarim. Rabbi Eliezer says no matter what he can do, no matter how many Yavamot there are, how many Yabamim there are, and Rabbi Yoshua says, well, it depends. If there's a one-to-one connection, then he can be made for a Neder. If not, he can't. So says the Gemara, let's try to understand. Bishlama Rabbi Akiva. It's very simple to understand the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva must hold, Savar, Ein Zika. There's no Zika. Now remember, we had this discussion extensively in Yevamot about how to understand the connection that exists when a woman's husband dies and she falls to the brothers. Is that a potential connection, is how we explained it, which is what we call Ein Zika, meaning at this time there's nothing that really, of course there is something because she can't go marry anybody else, but it's not considered to be essentially a consummated marriage or a consummated connection maybe, or a deep connection or not. So Rabbi Akiva holds there's no real connection. So that although, of course, halachically she can't marry someone else and he has to do yibum or chalitza, it's not equivalent to marrying a person, and therefore you can't be made for her nidar.
So wait,
Rabbi Yoshua right? I understand Rabbi Yoshua holds.
He rejects the whole concept of Zika?
He holds, so again, he rejects the terminology where you call Zika to be an intact thing. So meaning, of course, a woman has to marry them. But the question is there any significant halachic implications from that connection that consider them to already be married? So does he have to provide food for her, for example?
That assumed Zika, I mean.
Well, so Zika, again, Zika, it's a borrowed concept here. Zika, of course, there is a connection. She can't go and marry somebody else, just to be very clear, right? She is zakuk, quote unquote. She's connected to the surviving brother. But the question is, does that have any implications as if they're already married? Or does it mean that he has to do something, and when he does something, either yibam, which would consummate it, or chalitza, which would end it, that something will occur? So Rabbi Akiva seems to hold ein zika, and therefore, although Hashem says you got to marry her, he didn't marry her yet. And so there's no erison between them. And Rabbi Yeshua says there is zika. And so it's essentially as if he's already engaged to her. So if there's one brother, it's pretty clear. That brother is engaged, basically. He hasn't, meaning engaged real. He hasn't consummated the marriage, but he's committed to marry this Yavama, or at least to do something with the Yavama, right? But Rabbi Eliezer, my time, how does Rabbi Eliezer understand? I understand he holds Yesh Zika, but Ein Brera. You have no way to know which brother is going to marry her. So how could Shimon get up and say, I'm going to be made for her Nedarim, when Shimon might not be the one who married her? It might be Levi, right? And so there's no way to know until it happens. And so how could you say that either one essentially can do hafara? Rabbi Ami, of course that's not the case. The case is Kigon she'asa ba ma'amar. Remember, we introduced the concept in Yevamot of ma'amar, which is essentially you say to a Yevama, I'm going to marry you. You know, all our brothers got together. We feel terrible that our brother Reuven died. I'm the one who's going to take over his marriage, basically, his family. Let's get married. Here's a ring. It'll consummate it, or not consummate, it'll start it. In the summer, we'll get married, right? Because remember, you can only do it by sleeping with her, right? So you did ma'amar, and therefore there's 2 brothers or 5 brothers, but one of them did ma'amar. That one, according to Rebbe Eliezer, is essentially married to her. Not finalized, but as if he did, it's like an erison, basically. So it must be where you did ma'amar. And Rebbe Eliezer holds like Beit Shammai. Remember, we had a big debate in Yevamot about what's the status of ma'amar. Right? We said ma'amar might be only d'Rabbanan. It only sort of indicates it. There's only not a big, but Beit Shammai seemed to say ma'amar koneh kinyan gamur. That once you do ma'amar, in fact, you've actually really made a connection, a kinyan gamur midoraita, presumably, that connects you to her, and therefore it's like erison. You would need a get maybe after ma'amar. You would for sure need a get after ma'amar. Remember, Beit Shammai's opinion was if you then did chalitza after ma'amar, it's not enough, right? You're not done because you have to also give a get because you basically married her. And so therefore, according to Beit Shammai, you can do mefer and the Nedarim. Rabbi Yeshua says to you, 1 second, Hani mili amar lecha, Hani mili b'chad yavam. That's only true if there's only one brother. But if there were 2 brothers, al shnei yavmim lo. Why? Why can't you do it if 2 brothers? Because listen, even according to Beit Shammai, let's say there's Shimon and Levi, right? And Shimon gives the woman Kiddushin, basically, the widow of Reuven, gives her Kiddushin. If Levi comes and sleeps with her or gives her a get, let's say, or chalitza, maybe chalitza, then that's going to have an impact also. Because even though Shimon is betrothed to her, Levi has a connection to her, and Levi can sleep with her and do yibum basically until Shimon has done it. Now, remember, if that would ask her to root to Shimon. Obviously, a regular woman who Shimon and Levi have no connection to, if, let's say a married woman or a betrothed woman, if another random guy walks up to her and gives her a get, it has no impact, right? There's no connection between them. She's not divorced from anybody. It's just play. So says Rabbi Yoshua, clearly, even though ma'amar is real, it doesn't take away the connection that Levi has to do something. If he did it, he's not supposed to, but he could, right? So it says, now I'll read the Gemara. Amar, where am I? Because mi'ika midi, is there anything? Right? If the brother would come and either sleep with her, do bia, or give her a get, it would answer her to Shimon. So even though Shimon said, I'm ready, his mean brother, or not nice brother, could come and sort of take the rug out from under him. And so therefore, it's impossible for him to be made for Shimon because he's not totally in control of the situation. And that's why Rabbi Yoshua says, only if there's one brother. And Rabbi Akiva holds Ein Zika. Rabbi Akiva says, look, the fact that you went to her and said Ma'amar means nothing or nothing big. The fact that it's Zika is nothing big. And therefore, you cannot do Mefer the Neder until you actually either do Yibam or you get out of the relationship. Now, before we ask a question about Rabbi Akiva, says the Gemara now, 5 lines from the bottom, what about Rebbe Elazar? Now, not Rebbe Eliezer, so we change the gears. According to Rebbe Elazar, who has in the Gemara in Yevamot a different opinion in Beit Shammai, and Rebbe Elazar says that Beit Shammai really does not think that Ma'amar for a Yevamah makes a real Kedusha. And Rabbi Elazar says even Beit Shammai, who says Ma'amar is powerful, is only in regards to getting rid of the problem of a different sister. Remember the case, I'm going to remind you, Nava wasn't Daf Yomi back then. The case is where you have 2 brothers who married 2 sisters. This brings back some good memories, right? 2 brothers who married 2 sisters, and they've got a 3rd brother who's not married. So Reuven and Shimon married 2 sisters. We call them Rachel and Leah. And Levi is their younger brother. It doesn't matter what age he is, right? He's just another brother. Then Reuven dies. And so his wife, his widow, Leah, let's say, falls to Yibam, right? But Shimon cannot do Yibam, of course, right? Because Shimon's married to her sister. But Levi got no problem doing Yibam, right? Levi gives her Kiddushin. Levi does Ma'amar. So Levi does not do Yibam. He gives her something and says to her, I want to marry you, okay? And then Shimon dies. So Shimon's wife, Rachel in this case, falls to Levi also. Now remember, we had a discussion, the Gemara in Yevamot, a lot of discussion. What if no one did Ma'amar, right? Reuven and Shimon both died, and Rachel and Leah both fell to Levi. He can't do Yibam to either one because each one's a sister of someone who's fallen to him. But says Rabbi Elazar, in the opinion of Beit Shammai, if Levi already did Ma'amar to one of the sisters, when the second sister falls to him, it doesn't matter. Because since he's already married to her sister, she never falls to Yibam, and she's not part of the picture. And he can consummate the marriage to the first sister, right? Because he did Ma'amar. If he hadn't done Ma'amar and both wives fell to him, both sisters fell to him, he couldn't marry either one. But because he did Ma'amar to one, that made their connection real, according to Beit Shammai, and therefore pattered the second sister from ever falling to Yibam. So according to Rebbe Lazar, that's the implication of Beit Shammai holding that there's Ma'amar, but not that Beit Shammai said that you could do Ma'amar and therefore you're married and therefore you can be made for her Nedarim, right? So says the Gemara, according to Rebbe Lazar, the Amar, 5 lines on the bottom, Ma'amar le Beit Shammai ein koneh ela lidchot b'tzara. The only reason that Ma'amar works, the only situation that Ma'amar works, is to push off the tzara, push off, remember, the second wife, so that you don't have to worry about the second wife. But it doesn't make them be married, and therefore it wouldn't explain why you could be made for her Nedarim. So Ma'ikel Meimar says, well, you're right. There you'd have to explain, according to that opinion, that Hacha b'mayaskinan kegon she'amad b'din v'itchayev le'mizonot. We're talking about a situation, nothing to do with what we were talking about before. Reuven dies, his wife, his young wife, who's 12, right, falls to his brother Shimon for Yibam. Shimon says, I'm going to do Yibam, but I want to go on a trip. You know, I've got to go away for 3 years. She takes him to court and says, look, you've got to decide, what are you going to do? He makes a commitment in front of Beit Din, I'm going to pay your bills until I get back. So you're not going to be starving. You're not going to be, because you can't marry anybody else, but you're not going to be starving. And then she makes a neder. So in that case, he basically has committed in front of Beit Din to financially support her. And we had an opinion yesterday and the day before that anytime you financially are committed to supporting a woman, you can be made for her Nedarim, right? So it's not because of Ma'amar, it's not because of Yibam, it's because there's a financial commitment in front of Beit Din to support. So that was the discussion yesterday, which is a man who did Erisin with her does not have to support her. Right. But if 12 months pass, remember, he does have to support her, and then he can still do it on his own.
And a Yavam doesn't have to support her until
the estate does, right? Correct. So it's true. But in that way, because he's connected to her, he's going to be for her Nedarim. Now I was asking a phenomenal question, which is true, which is, does that mean he does it by himself or he does it with the father, right? Because if he's doing it from basically supporting her, that's like nisuin, basically. That's like being married. So you might think he would do it with the father, by himself. The problem is that she still lives with the father, so he also has control. So, and says the Gemara, the language is Rabbi Pinchas Mishmei de Rava, as Rabbi Pinchas said in the name of Rava, which we quoted yesterday, the Amar Kol HaNoderet Adat Ba'ala Hi Noderet. Whenever a woman makes a neder, she's doing it on basically the assumption that the person who supports me is going to approve of it. And so Adat Ba'ala doesn't mean necessarily husband, it means the one who supports her. And so therefore, the reason for our Mishnah has nothing to do with, according to Rabbi Eliezer, has nothing to do with Zika or not Zika. It has to do with this question of whether you're Noder Adat Ba'ala. Now, continues the Gemara on the top of Ayin Dalet Amud Bet. It's none. Let's go back and review our Mishnah and read what it says. It says in our Mishnah, Amar Rebbe Eliezer, we're quoting our Mishnah here, says Rebbe Eliezer, of course you can do hafara for a woman who falls to you to Yibam, because ma im isha shekana la'atzmo. If you marry a woman on your own by doing marriage, right, by giving her kiddushin, harehu mefer nidara, you then have the strength to be made for her nidarim. For sure, isha shehiknu min hashamayim, a woman who's given to you through heaven because a person's brother died, and therefore the Torah said you have to marry her. It seems like you should have even more power. I don't understand. You explained Rabbi Amri, right? Rabbi Ami explained on Amid Aleph that the case in our mission was where the Yavim did ma'amar. The Yavim married her. So what kind of Kal V'chomer can you be talking about? That if I married her on my own, I can make her a Nedarim, but if God did it, I can't, I for sure can. The case is not where God did it. The case is where you did it also. Right? You did ma'amar. So ask the Gemara, right? How could you say that kana min hashamayim? He did it by himself. Kana la'atzmohu. Well, he did it himself, but he also did it with help from God, right? Shekana la'atzmo al yedei shamayim. He did it himself, but he had help from God because that's what made her fall to Yibam. Sorry. So therefore, that's what Rabbi Eliezer would mean in the Mishnah. Says, well, at least tifshot debai Rabbah. We should at least be able to resolve the question that Rabbah asked in Yevamot, which is according to Beit Shammai. Remember, according to Beit Hillel Ma'amar is very minimal effectiveness. It's really just midrabanan. It doesn't do very much. Not nothing, but doesn't do very much. And according to Beit Shammai, that it's real. The Ma'amar is a real kinyan. Is it a real kinyan to make her Erison or to make her Nisuin? Meaning when a Yavam, does Ma'amar, does it make it that they're almost married, right? Like Erison, a little bit married, sorry? Or does it make it like Nisuin? Says the Gemara, that was Rabba's question. Ma'amar, the Beit Shammai, Erison osa or Nisuin osa? Does it make her like a status of a woman who's Erison or a status of a woman who's Nisuin? So the Ran points out, of course, he still does have to consummate it. But the question is, what if the Ran understands it to mean, which is fascinating, that if he consummates it without doing a chuppah, right? Let's say he just sleeps with her outside of the context of a bigger marriage, of bringing her into his home. So has he already done nisuin so that consummation makes it that they're fully married or not? So that's the question. But you see from our Mishnah that it's nisuin, because our Mishnah makes it sound like the Yavam can do hafara by himself, right? And it says he does it on his own. So if he does it on his own, it must be nisuin, because if it's not nisuin, if it's erison, then you have to do it with the father, right? So ma'amar le Beit Shammai, the question was erison osa, nisuin osa. Tifshot, you should be able to clarify from our Mishnah the nisuin osa, that in fact it's like nisuin. The erison osa, because if all ma'amar did was make them as if they're essentially engaged, then hatnan, we learned a week ago together that nara morasa v'yo bala mefir nidara, that take the father and the husband. And our Mishnah said, I'm going to read our Mishnah again. Shomeret Yavam, Rebbe Eliezer Omer Yafer. And that sounds like the Yavam can do it on his own, right? So clearly, it's like Nisuin. Says that's not a proof. When it says Yafer, my Yafer, Amar of Nachman, Amar Yitzchak, my Yafer b'shutfut. It doesn't necessarily mean that at all. It could mean that he can do it with the husband, with the father, sorry. But all it's saying is that he has power to do it, which would be a very big chiddush, because according to Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yoshua in some cases, he has no power whatsoever. So you can't prove from here that Yafer means Yafer by himself. And in fact, Tanya Nami Hachi, in fact, there's a Braita which seems, let me read this differently. Tanya Nami Hachi Rabbi Ami. There's a Braita that supports the statement of Rabbi Ami that this is a situation in our Mishnah where the Yavam did Ma'amar. What's the Braita that supports Rabbi Ami? So now we're about to quote for the rest of today's daf, which is not going to take so long. The rest of today's daf, we're going to quote a Braita, which is a Tosefta in the Sechet Nedarim, which gives an expanded version of our Mishnah. Okay? Says the Braita. You ready? Shomeret Yavam. A man, this again sounds a lot like our Mishnah. It's just the whole rest of the daf is an expanded version of our Mishnah. Let's say there's also some changes. Let's say you have a Shomeret Yavam, a woman, who's waiting to do Yibam, and she makes a neder. Says the Braita, which again is the same words as our Mishnah so far, Bein Yavam Echad, whether there's one brother waiting in the wings, Bein Shnei Yavmin, or there's two brothers, Rebbe Eliezer Omer Yafer. The person can be Mefer, and again, Rabbi Ami explained that meant that he can do it with the father if he did Ma'amar, right? So these two things that we've learned so far in today's daf, we're taking those for granted. We'll see why in a second. That the prospective husband, the brother basically, can be made for her neder. Rabbi Yeshua says, well, it's only true if there's one brother, le'achad v'lo l'shnayim, but not if there's multiple. Rabbi Akiva says, lo le'achad v'lo l'shnayim, not one brother, not two brothers. There's no marriage here yet. It's a potential marriage. The Shomeret Yavam has no value, no ability to be made for the neder. Amar Rebbe Eliezer. Again, this is very much similar to our Mishnah. Says Rebbe Eliezer, I don't get it. It's a kal v'chomer. Ma im isha she'en lo chelik ba ad shelo tavo l'reshuto, a woman who a husband, a prospective husband, has no connection to until he marries her, right? They're totally random strangers on the street. And they don't have to be random. They're strangers, basically, man and woman, man A, woman A. But once mishabat l'reshuto, once he actually gives her kiddushin and she comes into his reshut, nigmara lo, he's completely attached to her, right? And he can be made for a neder. So if that's true, an isha sheyesh lo chelik ad shelo tavo l'reshuto, a woman who the husband has a connection to before she comes into his reshut, because but once brother Ruvain died, she's automatically zakuk and connected to Shimon and let's say Levi and anyone who's there. So because of that, Misha bat the Rishuto, once she does come into his Rishut, now this is of course the proof that, what do you mean she came into his Rishut? It must be that he gave her Ma'amar, right? Because otherwise nothing changed. But that's one of the proofs. Once she comes into his Rishut, Eino din shetigmar lo, shouldn't it be for all purposes? Right? So before he did anything, she was already connected to him. So after he does it, she for sure should be connected to him, and he can therefore be made for. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said back to Rabbi Eliezer, whoa, lo, it's not correct. Im amri be'isha shekanuhu la'atzmo. It's one thing to talk about a woman where a man marries her on his own, meaning he does it outside of Yibam. Shekeshem she'ein lo chelik ba. Just like he had no connection to her before he married her, nobody else was connected to her. She was a free agent, right? She was a single woman, basically. But Tomar be'isha sheiknelo min hashamayim, this case of Yibam, where she was given to him automatically from heaven, meaning she was forced to marry him because her husband died. Shekishem sheyesh lo imo chelek, just like this brother Shimon has a chelek in her to marry her. Kach yesh la'acherim chelik ba. Levi and Yehuda and Yisachar also have a chelik in her. So how could Shimon say she's mine for the purposes of being made for her neder? He does not have an exclusive ability to marry her. Other brothers can marry her too, right? So therefore, your kal v'chomer makes no sense. What?
Yes, ours are highly big.
It doesn't matter. 1 second. That's different questions. You give him a question. So therefore, so that was Rabbi Akiva's answer. So Amar lo Rabbi Yeshua. Now, of course, Rabbi Yeshua perks up here. He says, Rabbi Akiva, your argument is very compelling if there are two brothers, right? If there's Shimon and Levi, then of course you can say that this woman, let's call her Leah, is not connected to only Shimon and only Levi, and therefore neither one can be made for her neder. But that's only true, says Rabbi Yeshua. Akiva calls him. Akiva. Divarecha b'shnei yavmin. Your words make a lot of sense if there's two potential yavamas. Yavmin. Ma'ata meishiv al yavam echad. What are you going to say if there's only one? Amar le Rabbi Akiva said back to him, well, Yeshua, my friend, you're missing the whole point. The point is not whether there's one brother or two brothers or 10 brothers. The point is, what's the connection between a yavama and a yavam, right? And the connection can't be different in a situation where there's one brother or 5 brothers. So just like if there's 2 brothers, one yavam's connection is that he's going to marry her, but he's not the only game in town. And therefore, it's not a complete marriage. And therefore, you can't be made for a neder. The fact that there happens not to be any other brothers doesn't change the connection, right? The reality is this is the depth of connection between a yavam and a yavama, and it's not complete. And so says Rabbi Akiva, Klum chalaknu al yavam echad val shnei yavmin. There's no difference whether it's one yavam or 2 yavmin. The connection is the same connection. And the proof of 2 yavmin applies to 1. And there's no difference. This is the second proof that it's talking about where he did ma'amar. Bein she'asa ba ma'amar, bein she'lo asa ba ma'amar. It doesn't matter whether a brother says, I'm going to marry you or not. The reality is that until you do the yibam, another brother can step in and do an action. And since that potential exists, it's not the same as Erison. Erison, it's a one husband to one wife. There's no room for anyone else. Here, there's room for other people, and therefore you can't do hafara. ukeshar dvarim, and just like other things, and we're going to say
Even if he did
tomorrow
Ma'amar?
means sorry.
Even if the brother did Ma'amar?
Even if he did Ma'amar, as Rabbi Akiva is saying, because if another brother steps in and sleeps with her after one brother did Ma'amar, it's he gets the Yibam, right? It might be he has to divorce her, but it takes it away from the first brother. Because until you've done Yibam, you haven't done Yibam, is basically what we said.
Right. But he's the other brother who slept with the woman. He did a sin, didn't he? I mean, he's
Well, so that's debatable, right? So it depends on Beit Shammai or Beit Hillel, which way you hold. But let's say he gave her a get. Let me pick a different case, right? That's the case we said on Amud Aleph. If the other brother comes in and gives a get to the Yavama, right? Before brother A died. Brother B said, I'm marrying you. They sent out invitations for June 15th, right? Before the wedding, brother C comes in and hands her a get. So everybody agrees that would ruin the ability for brother B to marry her because he's introduced some friction. Someone now has to do chalitza too. But anyways, the brother still has the ability to act on their thing. If Shimon marries a woman, right, and his brother walks up to her and gives her a get at the wedding, that has no impact.
so
right?
Ma'amar. It's not like Erusin.
If Shimon does Erusin to a woman, and before the wedding, his brother Levi walks over to that woman and gives her a get, there's no implication.
What if
right?
he sleeps with her? What if he sleeps with her?
Also, I mean, there's
That still doesn't matter for a regular
wait,
earth,
it doesn't matter.
but it
yeah.
does for a Yabam. For a Yabam.
But isn't that sleeping with a married woman?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's over
No,
in
Levi would be
Issacharite.
Levi would be killed. Yeah, no, 100% sleeping with a married woman. But so
But
since
here
anyways,
here he's not sleeping with a married woman.
No.
correct. Here he's sleeping with the Yavama, basically, his Yavama. So
Right.
the question whether he can
Who-
stay married to her is
Who's
a
engaged
lot of
to
debates.
his brother. Okay.
So Kishar Dvarim Kain Nedarim, again, we'll discuss tomorrow what that refers to. So anyways, this was Rabbi Akiva's response, was basically the connection between a Yavama and a Yavam is not the same as an Erusin. And the proof is that if there were two brothers, it would still exist. You can't have two marriages, right? You can't be married to two guys. And so therefore it must be that it's not as deep a connection. And that's why, says Rabbi Akiva, I'm of the opinion that none of the Yavamot, even Yabmim, even if they gave Ma'amar, they cannot be made for her Nedarim. Now, when Ben Azai heard about this completes the bride.
Also, she wouldn't be in there. Well, right. She
Whatever,
wouldn't be in
again,
her husband's home anyway, right?
Not necessarily correct. Bilashon Hazeh Amar Ben Azai, when Ben Azai either was there or heard about this, he said the following in this language. Chaval Alecha Ben Azai. Whoa, too bad for you, he said about himself, Ben Azai, Shelo Shimashta Rabbi Akiva, that I didn't spend more time with Rabbi Akiva. You hear such beautiful things from Rabbi Akiva, he can explain things so well. I feel really bad, says Ben Azai, that I didn't spend more time with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva students did have a habit of dying, but nonetheless, Ben Azai said, I chaval alecha, that I didn't spend more time with Rabbi Akiva because of the beauty of Rabbi Akiva's arguments and his explanations. Now, we're going to stop here maybe, because
We can go on to the Mishnah on the next page if you want.
we'll learn tomorrow. What do you mean? We don't need to.
Okay.
If we do it to the Mishnah, tomorrow's daf will be 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's stop here, I think.
Okay.
What time tomorrow works for the two of you? Because that seems like our audience and Nava.
Evening's good. Morning's good. Whichever you want.
Hanan, what do you prefer?
I think evening.
Okay, but you wanted 8 o'clock, Charlie? Is that what you said?
No, that was only last week.
So Hanan, 7:30 or 8? Which one you could choose?
7:30.
Okay, 7:30 tomorrow evening.
7:30 is actually better for me tomorrow too.
Perfect. 7:30 tomorrow. We'll pick up from here. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
We should all learn more with Rabbi Akiva. That's the best.
Yasher Koach.
Okay, Shavua Tov.